Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Wild and Live. I hope you're all doing really well. Welcome to the show. The show that brings you some of the coolest animal facts from across the world, and also some fabulous guests too, biologists, conservationists, and filmmakers. On our last episode, we were joined by Julia Newth. She was telling us all about Swan Champions. The Swan Champions are a dedicated group of people that across Northern Europe that are working to protect Buick swans. If you want to find out about that particular video and the work that Julia's doing at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust at Slimbridge, head over to the video once we're all done with this episode. Now remember, if you're a new viewer, please make sure you subscribe. So you smash that subscribe button down below, and also click the little bell link. It'll send you notifications every time we go live. But today, let's get into it. We are joined by a PhD student and marine biologist who has a passion for characterful fish. Rachel Gunn, are you Wild and Live?
I am indeed.
Awesome. Now we're going to double check that everything's coming through. We're having some issues with sound. Oh no, there's an echo on my side. So this is an absolute nightmare. Let me see if I can fix this really quickly. Let's see if we can do a little jiggery pokery. I don't know what else I'm meant to do because I've tested this a number of times. Let's try unplugging and plugging back in. Usually that works. Hello, let's see if that works. I'm not sure if that's working. I'm going to try and keep my dialogue very short, and we're going to listen to you. So, first question over to you, Rachel. What are butterfly fish? Why do you love them, and where do they live?
Okay, so butterfly fish are a really diverse group of fish. If you've ever been to an aquarium, you'll have probably seen a butterfly fish. They're quite small. Not very exciting shape. They're usually round, but they're really cool fish. So you find them all across the tropics. They're a saltwater species. Wherever there's a coral reef, there'll probably be a butterfly fish. You get them in all different colours, shapes, and some different sizes. Some are bigger than others. And you get a lot of species down in the Indo-Pacific, and then you get some, but not quite as many species in the Caribbean as well.
So when you say the Indo-Pacific, what kind of region are we looking at?
So we're looking everywhere from around Australia, the Seychelles, off the east coast of Africa. So it's a big area. So lots of different species there. It's a really diverse part of the world in terms of coral reefs. And then you've got the Caribbean as well, lot smaller area and not quite so many species.
Laying their eggs?
Yeah, so they live for somewhere between 7 and 10 years. And the way they breed and the way they interact with other individuals varies a lot with species. So you get some that will have a male that holds a territory, and in that territory there'll be quite a few females. But you also get what we call monogamous pair bonds. So two fish will come together and they'll effectively mate for life. So that's the species that I look at, the oval butterfly fish. They form a pair bond once they're mature, and they'll stay with that same individual for up to about 7 years.
Wow.
And they'll spend all of their time with that fish. So they have to really like the other fish.
Because
24/7, that's who they're with.
Yeah. They reminded me of Dory from Finding Nemo. I know that's a different species of fish. I think Dory's a blue tang, a Pacific blue tang. But their body shapes are quite similar.
Yeah, so Dory is a tang. So a tang is a surgeonfish. So yeah, they have a very similar shape to butterfly fish, but surgeonfish are usually a lot bigger. But yeah, you're right, they do look very similar. And that actually is, going on to Finding Nemo for a second, there is a butterfly fish in Finding Nemo.
Oh really?
There is,
yes.
Yes. So in Finding Nemo, when Nemo goes to school, there's a fish that's allergic to water, and that is a butterfly fish called Tad, I think. Yeah.
that would make for a really troublesome life as a allergic to water. Do they use their body shape to help them in any way?
Yeah, so they're really small, like I say, up to about 15 centimeters. But if you look at most of them head on, they're really hard to see because they're so narrow. They're like an oval discus shape. They're really, really flat if you were to put them on their side. And that's really useful when they're trying to avoid predators, because if a predator is looking at them that way, they're not going to really A, see it, and B, if they do see it, they're not going to think it's very big, so they're not really going to care much about getting a meal from it. The other thing that a lot of them have is if you were to Google a butterfly fish right now, you'd see that a lot of them have a spot somewhere on them. And that's what we call an eye spot. Some of them are really, really obvious, like it's a big black dot around their fins. Some are really tiny, but that they use that for the opposite reason that they use their body shape. So their body shape is to make predators think they're really, really small, but the eye spot is to make them think that there's something a lot bigger. So the eye spot actually looks like an eye, and if a predator was to swim by, they might think that that fish is way too big for them to try and catch and eat.
Yeah, so some really cool strategies there from Oval Butterflyfish. Let's talk about their markings. Really colourful, really bright. Do they use their markings for anything, like signalling or communicating with one another?
So usually, really brightly coloured animals, it's usually the males that are really brightly coloured to attract a female. So if you think of a peacock as a classic example, peacock's really, really colourful, and that's always the males, so they can show off to the females. The oval butterfly fish is a little different because the males and the females look exactly the same. So they don't really use it to attract a mate. But what they do use it for is all coral reef fish are really, really colourful. And the reef is really, really colourful. So they actually use that colour to blend in with the reef, which is quite unusual because usually things camouflage by looking quite dull in colour. But because the reef is so vibrant, the fish is so vibrant, so they use it to kind of hide in the crevices so they can avoid predators.
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to say, in terms of camouflage, they look so obvious.
Yeah.
But once you think about where they live, it all starts to fall into place and make sense.
Yeah, so yeah, the reef is so diverse and so colourful that it makes sense for the fish to be like that as well.
What kind of predators are they trying to avoid? Why are they trying to blend in?
So usually it's just anything bigger than them that's a predatory fish. So that can be anything like snappers, groupers, maybe some small sharks as well. But because they are quite small, they can get away with hiding in the crevices quite a lot. So they're not massively bothered by predators, but they do have those defences in place like we just talked about.
Butterflyfish love coral reefs, as you've already said. In fact, they're known as corallivores. Can you tell us what are corallivores and what's their relationship to reefs?
So a corallivore is anything that feeds directly on live coral tissue as part or all of their diet. So you have two types of corallivores. You have what we call a facultative corallivore. So that's something that can eat coral and enjoys it, is an obligate corallivore. And that means that it has to feed on coral to survive. It can't feed on anything else. So an obligate corallivore really likes coral reefs because that's where it gets all its meals from.
So it essentially lives where it eats. It reminds me of like a gingerbread house.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was going to ask you. I feel like we'd be forgiven for thinking that oval butterflyfish, seeing as they are obligate corallivores, they only eat coral, are actually quite bad news for coral reefs.
So you would think that at first, yes. But firstly, the fish are quite small, so even though there's a lot of them, they are really, really small. And the corals themselves also have some really cool defences. So if a butterfly fish comes and feeds on part of a coral, so the coral will have the little live tissues that we call polyps, and that's what the butterfly fish feed on. So if a butterfly fish is feeding on one part of a coral, on the other half, the polyps will probably retract, so the fish can't eat them. And also, they don't damage the corals at all, other than taking individual polyps out. You do get some bigger fish, so some really big parrotfish, and they're what we call excavators, and they come along and they take massive chunks out of the reef. You can actually, if you're diving, you can actually hear them doing it. It's like someone biting down on lettuce or an apple. It's really loud, and that can cause a bit of damage. But the butterfly fish, they're not doing much damage to the reef at all. They're just enjoying their meals and doing no harm to anyone.
I've never thought of necessarily as fish as having personalities, but this is exactly what you're studying. How do you even go about looking into this from a biological or scientific perspective?
Yeah, so that's what my PhD is based on. So I work at Lancaster University, funded by NERC, and what I do through that is basically looking at how these fish behave as coral cover declines. So personality is something that we associate it with people, but basically what it means is how individuals vary in their behavior. So how one fish is different to another fish on the same reef and across different reefs. And the way we do that is actually really, really simple. We get in the water and we look at the fish. It's as simple as that. So butterfly fish are really great because they don't care about people being in the water. So you can follow them really easy and film them, and you can be quite confident that your presence isn't affecting their behavior. So we can get in the water and we can look at these fish and we can get their activity levels, so how much time they spend feeding, how many bites they're taking out of the coral. We can get some exploration measurements, so how much time they spend swimming around, aggression as well, how much time they spend defending their territories and chasing off any invaders. And then we can also look at boldness. So boldness, you often measure slightly differently. So we call them like a lot of different tests that you can do. So really simple, if you were to get a pencil and you were to approach a butterfly fish with that pencil, you would record the distance at which that fish swam away, or any response that that fish has to the pencil. If it stays there and it comes to investigate the pencil, you've got quite a bold individual, or if you present it with the pencil and it swims away, then you've got a less bold individual.
I wonder what kind of personalities do you get? I mean, do you notice? I don't know. Do you get some that are kind of really flamboyant, like the Fresh Prince of the butterfly fish world? Do you get the Tony Sopranos that bully other butterfly fish? What kind of personalities do you get? And do you have any favorites?
So the one thing that I tend to look at is aggression, because that's something that you do notice really obviously between individuals when you're looking at them, because it can be quite hard to tell if one's feeding more than another, but it's really obvious if you've got a really feisty fish that's spending a lot of its time chasing off other fish. And I really like the aggressive ones. They're standing up for themselves, they're defending their territories. And you also get some that spend all of their time sort of a few centimeters away from their breeding partner. So that's quite cute. You see them swimming around together, feeding together, and then you get some that don't care quite so much in that. So some are less invested in their relationships than others.
Rachel, you're looking into how their behaviour is affected by where they live. So
is that where you've got quite a healthy reef, so you've got quite good coral cover, the breeding pairs, they'll hold quite small territories, because in that territory is a good quality food source. So they'll spend a fair amount of time feeding. They won't really be exploring that much because they don't need to. They've got a small area that's their own. And they're also a lot more aggressive. So they'll chase away other individuals quite a lot more than they would on a low coral cover site, because they've got a nice little area of food, and that food gives them the energy that they can then use to be aggressive and maintain territory defense. And you compare that to a more degraded site, so a lower coral cover, territories are a lot bigger and they're not really defended aggressively, because these pairs are just trying to find food. So there's no point being aggressive if you're trying to defend something that isn't very good. So they'll spend their time swimming around looking for food, and they won't necessarily find that food either, so they're also spending less time feeding.
Okay, so they change their behaviour depending on their habitat and the availability of food. It's interesting because usually when you see a reduction of food availability, I would think that would make a species more aggressive because they're trying to make sure that they get more of that food. But you're saying that's not the case with these butterfly fish.
I think initially, if you were to go to a really nice coral site and go to a territory, and you were to immediately take some coral away or just cover up coral or whatever, then yeah, I would say that they would get more aggressive, because at that time they've still got the energy to be aggressive, and the value of their food has become more important to them. So initially they'll become more and more aggressive, but there'll be a point where they can't maintain that level of aggression anymore because the food has decreased so much, and that's the point where they'll individuals will be less aggressive and more exploratory.
Right. When we think about coral reefs around the world, we know that they're undergoing a lot of change. We've looked into that in some of our previous episodes. Can you remind us of some of the stresses that butterfly fish might be facing, and also the corals in which they live?
So the obvious one for butterfly fish is coral bleaching, because when a coral bleaches, they lose up to 85% of their food source that the corals need to grow. So they're not going to be of any use to a butterfly fish as a food source. And if there's consistent bleaching, those corals will completely die. So they're, again, no longer a food source. And also things like there's increasing research looking at the carbon dioxide concentration in the oceans. So the carbon dioxide concentrations are increasing, which changes the pH of the water. A lot of fish use chemical signals to decide where to settle and to communicate. And because the chemistry of the water's changed, that can affect the signaling communication of the fish. And another big stressor in the oceans at the moment is plastics. So microplastics that you can't even see, they'll be digested by fish, and that can obviously have impacts on their behavior and survival as well.
What can we learn from butterfly fish, from oval butterfly fish, when it comes to tracking things like our climate? I'm wondering. I'm trying to think. Are they almost like the canary in the coal mine?
So butterfly fish, they're actually quite good indicators of reef health because they rely on live coral cover. A lot of fish rely on coral, but they'll use that coral to hide. So the fact that the coral is live isn't necessarily as big a deal, but butterfly fish, particularly obligate corallivores, they need the coral to be live so they can feed on it. So they're quite a good indicator of reef health, because if you've got a reef with a ton of obligate corallivores on it, you've got quite a lot of live coral cover. So you can use butterfly fish to get an indication of whether you've got a reef that's really good, whether it's degrading slightly.
I want to know, we're almost out of time here. Time seems to just fly past. We're trying to stick to a 20-minute session today. But I want to know, I mean, you've been on a number of different expeditions. What is it about exploring the seas and the oceans that really gets you going?
I think it's different every time. Even if you're working on the same two sites, which I do for my field work, every time you get in the water, you're going to see something different. Sometimes you might not see much, but sometimes you'll see loads. And I find it incredible that every time you get in the water, you don't know what you're going to see.
You've got. Let's finish on this because quick check. No questions on there. You have got a couple of things that people can do at home. I think you mentioned something like butterfly tag and some other bits as well. What kind of cool games can people play at home? I know you're really passionate about communicating science with kids in schools.
Yeah. So broader coral reefs at the moment. If you have an Apple device, there's NASA have just released an app that basically allows you to help them map the world's coral reefs. Wow. So I think there's a link on the YouTube video. So if you click on that, you can they'll give you a section of reef, and you can click on sand and coral and mark it as sand or coral. In some cases, you'll need a bit of experience in ID to know what the fish and corals are, but everyone knows what sand looks like, and everyone knows what rock looks like, and everything is really important and helps monitor what's happening to our world's reefs. So that's really good. One that a little game that I came up with when I started doing kind of community outreach is something that I call butterfly fish tag. So you can do it with two people in a family. You just need someone that's going to be a butterfly fish that's trying to invade another butterfly fish, and you can have people being corals, so standing in really weird shapes. And if you've got a high coral cover site, these people can be in weird shapes and the butterfly fish can move around and chase away the invader. But if you've got a low coral cover site, those corals are a little bit sad and they're not very good shape anymore, and the butterfly fish are tired, they're hungry, so they can't defend their territory as effectively. So those invaders can try and tap and tag the corals without being chased off by your butterfly fish.
Great. Butterfly fish tag. One to maybe play once we are out of this pandemic situation. Of course, remember to wash your hands, make sure you practice social distancing as much as possible. And yeah, we'll keep that butterfly tag for a bit later down the line. But I like that. That initiative being run by NASA. Again, as Rachel mentioned, you can find that all in the description of this episode. I think we are. Our time's up. It flies by so quickly. But Rachel, just wanted to say a massive thank you for joining us, and we'll definitely catch up with you again soon.
No problem. Thank you.
Nice one. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was Rachel Gunn, everybody. She was telling us about passion for butterfly fish and their personalities. I really think of fish as having personalities. Our next episode is going to be on. Let's have a look. Who have we got on next? It's going to be on Friday. We have Mark Elliott, beaver expert Mark Elliott. He's going to be telling us why beavers are vital to the health of our rivers and waterways. So make sure you tune in then and have your questions ready. Until then, if you haven't already done so, if you're a new viewer, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Gets me every time. And also click the bell. That will send you a little notification every time a new video gets posted. But until then, I will see you next time. And thank you everybody for watching.